Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Vision to Value. It's our podcast where we're talking about how we're going to kind of look behind the curtain on state government, health and human services, technology initiatives. If you're here, hopefully you saw our first episode and you came back for more. We spent a little time sort of just laying the groundwork last time for a lot of things that we're going to dig deeper into this time, and some straight talk. We really just want to have conversations like we do when we're on the phone with each other. So, Tony, did you want to say a few words before we dive in?
No, looking back at the first one, I feel like this could be a real tool for any group that's looking to sort of go through this process. So I'm glad to be part of this. This is fun.
Yeah, it is fun. Well, so today, our episode today, we're really talking about is problem or product, right? Like, what is the trap of choosing a solution without really knowing what the business problems are that you're trying to solve? So we're going to kind of dive into that, talk about, why that occurs. It's been a trend, right? In the last couple of years, you'll see an RFP come out and it'll say, must be on a X platform or, something like that. And, it's very much a solution mindset. And perhaps sometimes the solution is selected for a lot of valid reasons, which we'll talk about. But there are consequences to that approach. And so what are they and how do you balance that? And so we'll kind of kick that off. And, Tony, when you hear solution first mindset, what are your thoughts on that and what that really means?
Well, the first thing that came to mind was I had experience previously where a group of program folks came to me and said, "Hey, we just came back from Florida and they had this great tool and we want it. What do we have to do to get that tool?" And, they were super excited about it because in that narrow instance, it was very effective. Florida was very proud of it. And we had to sort of have a conversation about, well, let's back up. What problem are we solving? How does this interface with other, systems that we have and different tools? We knew we had a massive sort of legacy system upgrade coming. So let's take a step back and see what the problem is and define the problem we're solving before we just go buy a solution and apply the solution. The other piece of that too is sort of helping educate program folks too that, the IT shop has to support every solution that every division has. And that's another sort of factor that they weren't aware of, right? That's an issue on the IT side. And if everybody goes off and buys 50 different solutions for 50 different problems, that's a lot of backroom support that's required. Mm-hmm. So that's what I think of is sort of that solution first mindset. We love this solution. Help us figure out how to buy it.
Mm-hmm. And it's so interesting because I hadn't really thought about that, but I certainly have seen that happen a lot as well. My immediate reaction to solution first was a CIO, wants a particular standard because they're thinking about it from an enterprise perspective, right? And to your point, because they have to, at the end of the day, maintain and support it. Now, some of that's changing, right, with a lot of these software as a service options that are out there. And so the role of a state IT department is changing a little bit in some regards. So there's certainly some still valid reasons for why I want to have standards as a CIO in my organization. And so I might want to leverage previous investments in that platform. If I've already bought it and implemented in child support, why wouldn't I want to use the same thing in child welfare, right? If I'm responsible for all of that and thinking about economy of scale and standards and support, those are all sort of things that kind of play into those decisions.
Yep, absolutely. It's funny. I was I like analogies, right? So I was thinking about it yesterday, and you think about somebody that's got a drip coming from their ceiling, right? You can get a bucket and just capture the water. Problem solved. The carpet doesn't get wet. You could replace the drywall and patch it and paint it, and that will make it look better, and it'll stop dripping for a while. But eventually, whatever's causing the drip is going to come back. You could replace your roof, right, and back it up to that. Or it could be that your gutters are just backed up and you just need to sweep the leaves out of your gutters. And so I think when we talk about, this issue with solutions, versus trying to understand what the problem is, you can spend a lot of time and money and effort with the different phases of solutions. But if you don't take 10 seconds and think about what the problem is, are you going to find out that you could have just cleaned out your gutters and you wouldn't have had to do all those other things?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I like that. Yeah, there is an element of problem analysis, root cause analysis that we need to look at, because we can get wowed by the shiny objects, right? And feel like, geez, we want this new thing because it's trendy, or we hear about all the bells and whistles, but if it doesn't ultimately solve the problem we have, how good is that? And then the other side of that is, um, you may not have a technology problem, and maybe you don't have an immediate business problem, but what about where we are now with like the opportunity cost associated with not choosing the right product? And we could talk about that a little bit too, like in terms of, for example, if I implement I always go to mobile just because that's easy for me. But if I implement a mobile solution and suddenly my, child support clients can do a whole lot of things on their own, I now have solved a capacity issue in my operation. So now I've not only, improved engagement with my clients and created data quality improvements and all of that, but I also have this capacity thing. So maybe I'm trying to solve one problem, but I can solve a couple of others if I really understand where all those needs are, and conducted a bit of analysis and where are those opportunities to improve.
Yeah, no, and you see that, right? You see that all the time where you can accidentally solve other issues, right? But at the same time, you can also sort of make the mistake of not stopping long enough to sort of think about the implications of what the solution is, right?
Mhm.
You know, I have found my experience has been sometimes we have a solution for a bad process. And if we had fixed the process, we wouldn't have needed to invest in the solution. Or the process was good, people weren't being held accountable to following the process.
Mm.
So good good technology, good process, bad sort of utilization of the process. There was somebody who nobody wanted to confront about the way they were using the process, and so
Mm.
there were all these workarounds that everybody was scrambling. And if you
Yeah.
took a second to think about what you had and what the problem was, you'd find out that, well, if we just got Tom to do what he was supposed to, then the process would work seamlessly and we wouldn't need to invest in new technology. So
Right.
I think that's another element to this, is being willing to hold people accountable to how things are supposed to work, but also taking the time, instead of just knee-jerk reacting to whatever the pressures are that we'll talk about in a minute that cause us to do this, taking the time to stop. Let's have a conversation. Let's talk through, right, how we got to where we are, and then that, I think, will pay huge dividends down the road, whether you need technology or not.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you kind of alluded to it a minute ago. Like you said something like, if we would just take the time, right, and look at what the process is, or where the problems are and where the opportunities are. But instead, I think a lot of agencies are very interested in speed, right?
Yes.
And so that's one of the things that we've talked about, is just that the notion that if there's already a solution in house that I can extend, or a vendor who I already have in place who
Yeah.
has a solution that they could bring in, that brings with it, kind of perceived speed and perceived simplicity, right?
Well, and reactiveness, right? I mean, and as we talk about sort of why we get into this situation, you've got an administration or a legislature that there's something happening, and they want to know what you're doing tomorrow to address it, right? Come back next week, we're going to suspend your sunset hearing and you come back next week and help us understand what you're going to do to fix this problem. And I think there's that sort of, we don't have time to really stop and evaluate it and think it through. We've got to come back next week with, this is the immediate action we're taking to address your concerns.
Yeah.
And I think that contributes to some of this
Yeah, for
dynamic.
sure. Creates that urgency. And so, so certainly these are some very valid reasons why people might go solution first.
Mm-hmm.
But what are sort of the downstream consequences of that? So, I definitely have these pressures as a leader or a CIO or a commissioner. And I go this fast route, perceived simple route, the reactive route. What are those downstream kind of things that might result from me doing that?
Well, there's a whole litany of things. We talked about, right, having too many solutions that maybe can't all be supported, right, adequately. I think there's a cost element to that, right, where you're spending a lot of money on patches, where if you stopped and thought about sort of a global solution, you might save money because there's a platform change you could make or something that would help everything for the same or less money. Misaligned solutions, I think, you solve child support's problem, but you may be creating a problem with somebody that interacts with child support, right? There's unintended consequences of that sort of thing. And then really at the end of the day, I mean, there's failure to address sort of the root cause. I think when you are too quick to respond and you go with the solution first, maybe you're not addressing that Tom is the problem or the process is the problem, right? And it wasn't the technology, it was something else. So I think failure to address sort of the root causes is another implication of, or consequence of going this route.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when you talked about the unintended consequences, and you use the different agencies, a lot of health and human services organizations have very distributed service delivery models, right? And so if I go off and implement a new solution for my state agency, if I haven't considered all the counties in a county administered state where they might have a
Right.
lot of different solutions at play, or all of the providers who are off using different solutions, and now I'm dictating that, nope, we're gonna go this other route, we're gonna use this thing, and you're gonna have to just get in line and do it. It's not always that simple, right? There are a lot of time and money and other implications associated with those sort of mandates.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that because I think that's part of what contributes to not being willing to take the time, especially in some of the states that have the county. It's such a big problem that if you try to engage all the counties who all have different levels of technology and sophistication, and plus all the stakeholders, plus the timeliness for responding to the legislature or the media or the administration, it just becomes overwhelming to think,
Yeah.
okay, we don't have the bandwidth to do this right. Good, fast, or cheap, right? Pick two, right?
Right.
And
Right.
so, and so I think what happens is it's like, look, we have to make an executive decision with what we think works best for everybody. And if everybody doesn't like it, that's tough. But we can't take a year to get everybody's input. Everybody's not going to be happy anyway. So let's just make a decision and go with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's part of what contributes to this situation.
Yeah. Yeah, we've talked about that before too, like just that whole setting realistic expectations, right? If we walk in indicating that this thing is going to be the best thing since sliced bread and everybody's going to be happy and it's all going to be nirvana, that's not reasonable, right? So if we start to paint the picture early and often of what the reality is and how we're going to do our best to accommodate everyone, and we're all committed to the same mission, right, of serving people, then we should be able to work it out. But I think a lot of times when we start over expressing the this notion that everybody's going to be happy and everybody's going to get what they want, that's not attainable, right?
It's not, and there's some work that can be done to mitigate that, right? And I don't want to go down this rabbit hole much, but if you've got a county administered state and you've got one county that it's a big county, but they're way behind technology wise, and the solution is going to help everybody else except the big county that's noisy, and they have, they've got a representative in the House that's vocal. You've got to have the right people in your team, like your legislative liaison people, right, people that interact with the media, but you've got to have somebody that reaches out to that person
Mm-hmm.
proactively and says, "Hey, this is a big problem, right? We're trying to solve it for 100 counties. This works for 98 counties. Unfortunately, not one of the two it doesn't work for is in your district."
Yeah.
And help them understand, so that way, at least they're aware of it. You've had that conversation with them, and even if they vocally, in session, want to sort of call you out for it, at least behind the scenes they're not going to block it
Yeah.
because they understand sort of the dynamic that you're in. That's another piece of this that I think is easy to miss, right? You could think that's not important, right? We're trying to make the best decision for the state as a whole, but there is a political element to it that you've got to be conscientious about and know, okay, who doesn't this work for? What can we do to mitigate it for them to make it less painful for them? And is there somebody we need to educate to make sure they understand why we had to come to the decision we did?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And I think a lot of that, goes back to defining the problem first, right? Taking that time, figuring out how this particular initiative, whatever it may be, is going to affect all of the different stakeholder organizations, getting that alignment in place, right? And then figuring out, how do we create the plan from there? And so when we're defining the problem, like what are those kind of key questions that an agency might ask themselves when they're trying to figure that out in a solution agnostic sort of way, right? Like at this point, I'm not solutioning, trying to figure out what my problem is before I can go off and start to figure out how I'm going to solve it.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a lot of things we've talked about, right? It's taking the time, it's engaging the stakeholders that need to be engaged. It's looking at the big picture that includes sort of some of the back office stuff. It's what does your budget allow for? It's a lot of those things, right? I think it all starts with data, right? You've got to have good information. It can't just be anecdotal, where somebody thinks this is the problem and this is it starts here. What supports that, right? It
Mm-hmm.
could be that's 1% of the problem. It's just
Yeah.
it's 100% of the problem to that person,
Yeah.
but big picture, it's a small piece of it. So it starts with data. You've got to build a consensus, right? You got to get everybody in the room that needs to be in the room, that either has a problem that can contribute to sort of what the solution needs to be, or that you need to educate sort of the why we're doing this.
Mm-hmm.
So regardless of what decision you make, whether they like it or not, they'll understand the logic that went into the decision that was made. And
Mm-hmm.
then I think the biggest thing is developing a roadmap. And all of these things take time. And I think part of the reason we're doing this podcast is to help people understand there is expertise out there, that you can leverage, like us or other entities that know what best practices are nationally, right? That have had successes and failures in this domain previously, and so that way you're not stubbing your toe, the same way other places have stubbed their toe, right? You can mitigate some of that by having a roadmap and selfishly bringing in some sort of consultation to sort of help you do it the right way, because we
Mm-hmm.
know that these agencies, they don't have a lot of bandwidth. There's
No.
not hundreds of people sitting on the bench waiting for something to do. They
Right.
all have day jobs, they all have a lot on their plate already, and sort of the ask to stop and think about this creatively and constructively, that's a real lift. And you need somebody to either help facilitate that or sort of mitigate that by having the background and the expertise that you're looking for to get from your staff that doesn't have time to weigh in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think having an understanding too, like when we say solution first, you don't want to be solution first. We don't mean that you don't have an understanding of all of the products and solutions on the market. you should, take some time, whether it be through, objective counsel or your own research, to figure out what are the types of solutions that are out on the market. Because in my experience, there is not a single product that's going to solve all the problems for an agency, right? And I
Sure.
think we talked about this just a little bit last time. Like, there might be some point solutions that you could use in combination with a platform or something like that. But I think and we're going to talk about procurement next time. But in order to get a good procurement, to get competition, to get good pricing, to get innovation, you have to construct your procurement vehicle in a way that explains what problem I'm trying to solve, what are the things that I want to affect in my agency, what are the outcomes I want to achieve, and leave it to the vendor community to tell you about all of the various products and solutions that are on the market. Because there's so many new things, which new in some folks' mind might be risky, but some of the proven stuff is risky too, as we've seen, right? So I think that you have to, like, just be informed, educated, and not be like so set on any one solution as being, the magic wand to solve all your problems. Like, put it out there and then see what comes back in that procurement process.
And we've seen that. A lot of the failures have been where they're trying to get one solution that did everything for everyone, and that has never worked that I've seen. I've never seen an example where that worked because the requirements are always sort of old by the
Yeah.
time from when you wrote them to when you actually go to market and do implementation. Um, there's never one size fits all. Every state, every department does a little bit differently than another state or another department. And then you've got you can create technical debt too if you have to customize it to the extent that everybody is pseudo happy because it's one size fits all and you tweak it, then you're constantly behind trying to keep up with all the customization that you did, with every release and every, patch that you need to do. It's, yeah,
Mhm.
it can get expensive. The other thing too, I think, with just sort of picking solutions along the way that people don't talk about enough are the through costs, right?
Mm.
Um, it might cost 50K to buy this solution that you can plug into your current system and it works to help with some sort of business process flow and it solves that problem. But it's not just the 50K, it's the cloud costs year over year, right? It's the subscription that you might have to pay, to keep it updated. Like,
Mhm.
that's another element of this. I think that if you spend the time and energy on the front end, either with getting help from consultants and or a lot of time being deliberate about the procurement and the way you go about procuring things, the time and energy you spend on the front end will pay huge dividends on the back end with a successful, timely, on budget sort of go live, right?
Mhm.
And I
Yeah.
think that's the gist of this today. That's a takeaway:
Yeah.
is invest the time early and the time and the money early, and it will save you lots more time and lots more money on the back end than
Yeah.
if you rush through it and then it doesn't work. You're trying to fix it. People aren't happy. You don't get the results you want.
Yeah. And the other takeaway kind of that I have too is, you should think about technology as a tool or tools, not a strategy. You have a program that you're running. Think of that as a business, right? And there are many things that you're going to do to keep that business, that program running and operating and being an organization of excellence, right? Delivering on your mission. And that technology is one piece of that. There are other elements of that as well, right? Keeping your people happy, keeping your clients happy, making sure that all of your policies make sense. There's many aspects. Technology is an enabler for your organization. And so leveraging modern technology appropriately requires for you to have a clear understanding about your business model. And I think a lot of people, a lot of executives, if we were to ask them, um, would agree that perhaps their program and processes aren't as efficient as they would like them to be. And in some cases, it's because they have been inhibited by the wrong technology for years. If you had new technology, you might completely revamp your processes. And yet we see requirements that are patterned after how they use their old system time and time again versus processes that would make a lot more sense enabled by modern technology solutions.
Yeah, it's funny. There's a anecdote, sort of a country saying. I don't remember it exactly, but it was basically somebody was complaining it was taking too long to hammer the nails to build a roof, let's say, and so somebody handed him a nail gun. So they started hitting the nail with the nail gun. They didn't change their process at all. They just used the new tool to, and applied it to the
Same
old
way.
process.
I
And it's
love
like,
that.
wait a minute. So I have to look that up and get a better, a more concise way to explain that. But that's we talk about, you can't just apply new technology to old processes and ways of doing business. This goes back to what we mentioned in the first podcast about transformation.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to leverage new technology to the extent possible, you've got to transform the way you're doing business, be willing to look at processes and staffing levels and how things are working today and amend those to leverage the technology. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's a big gap we have today. I honestly
Yeah.
do.
For sure. I know I saw something on LinkedIn recently where, and I won't name the state, but it was a person, a consumer who had called a hotline for something. And every 3 minutes, they would ask you, do you want to continue to wait? And you have to press a button, and it that 3 minutes was insufficient for this person to be able to go to the bathroom or get a drink or water or whatever, because she'd been waiting on the line for hours. And so she complained to this organization about this issue, and so they changed the time from a 3 minute uh, recurring request to press a button to 10 minutes or 15 minutes. And I'm thinking, why is she waiting for 2 hours for someone to answer the phone?
Problem solved.
So in the spirit of our solving the right problem conversation, I thought I would share that. But we're just trying to, like, with this episode today, just get folks to say, okay, let's stop being so solution focused. And sometimes there are reasons, valid reasons for that we discussed, and to just be focused on how you can really leverage technology to have the biggest investment impact in your organization. That's kind of the goal today. Any closing thoughts, Tony?
No, no. The only thing that comes to mind is sort of cell phones, right? I mean, cell phones are getting more and more expensive, and you've got, your phone bill gets higher and higher every year. But, if you're just using your phone for phone calls,
Right.
right? You're not, you spent $1,000 on an iPhone, but you're still only making calls with it. You're not using it to keep up with your schedule, right? Or the note function or the camera or anything else. And
Yep.
I think that's part of what we're trying to say here is, if you're going to make an investment in technology, make sure you're leveraging it to the extent that it's capable, and you're not just spending $1,000 to make phone calls,
Right.
right?
Love that.
So.
Yeah. Well, and as I mentioned, our next episode, we're going to try to put two of these out a month for as long as hopefully we feel we're adding value and talking about interesting things. One of the biggest things, I once had a director of a child welfare agency not that long ago. I asked him what's the thing that keeps you up? Actually, he was head of DHS, but what's the thing that keeps you up most at night? And he said procurement. And I'm like, really? That's it. So yeah, procurement pitfalls. That's what we're going to talk about next time, and how you can buy technology in today's environment. Right? We all know what the challenges are. We'll briefly touch on those, and we're going to talk a bit more about some ways to ask for what you need in your procurement, and the ways in which you might consider buying a little differently, so that you can have more effective, buying experience and processes. But until then, We really hope you enjoyed this particular session. We'd love for you to follow us on LinkedIn and on YouTube. So you can subscribe to our channel so that you can get updates about new episodes when they're dropping and things like that. Feel free to connect with both Tony and myself. We would love to hear from you. You can send us emails, suggestions, connect with us on LinkedIn, whatever works for you. And thanks so much for joining us on Vision to Value. And we hope to see you again soon. Thanks.